We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about some excellent baits and presentations that you can use to generate some really big bites as we head into the fall. And I've got a special sneaky bait that you're really going to like. Stick around, we're going to talk all about it. Got him. That's a good one. That is a tank. Oh, that's a tank. Come, stay down, stay down, stay down, stay down. Ooh. Oh, that's a good one. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And as we move from August into September, those temperatures start to come down just a little bit. Here in South Mississippi, we go from 105 to 107 to more in that 95 to 93 degree temperature range. And it still sounds like it's very hot, and for a lot of people it really is, but for this area, that's downright cool. It makes things feel so much better than they did. And now we're getting a lot more wind as we move into the fall, which means we're getting a lot more wind generated current. And it also helps to blow the heat off of that water and cool it down even further, which will cause those bass to set up differently. They're going to be preparing not just for the fall turnover, but for the fall feed. And we're starting to see just a little bit of that right now. We're starting to see just a bit of a change in the attitude of how those bass are setting up. And there's some ways we can attack that. There are some ways we can take advantage of that. Now, for the most part, they're still going to be feeding up on those bait balls, and they will be for a while, those small minnows, shad, shiner, sunfish, or whatever, and we can go after them with certain types of presentations. You know, I was using this. This is just a regular old swim bait. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, because on those fisheries, the crowded, pressured fisheries, everybody's going to be throwing noisy crankbaits, and this, believe it or not, kind of cuts through all that clutter just by accurately mimicking what those bass are already feeding on. And in a clear water fishery, well, that's just going to work best. And you know, you get 5-6 feet of visibility. You don't have to go crazy with it. You can change your colors up. This is just a regular pale color. I don't remember what the color Kitech calls it, but this is what I was using. You can see it's pretty chewed up. It caught me a few fish and it worked well. I was using it in a little bit more open water. I was using it a little bit deeper. And when I saw those minnows schooling, or I knew the bass were active in that area, I could target those suspending fish with this, just a 1/4 ounce swim bait head, and it worked well. I was able to generate a few strikes just doing that. It doesn't have to be a ribbed swim bait. It could be something like a Scottsboro or your favorite type of swim bait, but something along those lines. I try to keep it between the 3.25 inch all the way to the 4 inch. I'm still not going real big this time of year, but I find that I can generate some nice strikes doing that. Again, it's not hard. All you have to do is make sure you're in the area where the current is flowing. You've got that back edge where the bass can get out of that current and they can kind of hit that slack water, but use that current to feed them, those current seams and those current edges. And if you can see those bait balls in the area, then basically you know you're in the right spot. And you can either hoof it from the bank or you can keep your boat, you know, right near that area. And I'm telling you, those are going to be prime real estate spots for how you want to fish those swim baits. You know, and if you're in my type of area, if you're in shallow water, if you're in a lot of vegetated water, well, then you guys remember this, the good old lowbrow rig, right? And again, this one's kind of chewed up because I was fishing it in that grassy area. And this is just a bitsy bug, or a bitsy flip in this case, that I've taken the skirt off of. I've taken the skirt off of it and I just thread a regular old Rage swimmer on there. That's all this is. This is kind of like a smoky shad color because I was trying to imitate a little bit what those bass were feeding on. And this comes right through that vegetation like butter. So if you have a lot of vegetation, if you're fishing from the bank and you don't want to fish a regular swim bait head, you don't want to fish something like this because you're afraid it's just going to get, you know, all caught up with gunk on every cast, I'm telling you, give this little trick a try. You know, I've been doing this for a few years And in the heavily vegetated waters I fish, that comes right through. It gives me that swim bait presentation and allows me to fish a swim bait in areas, well, I ordinarily wouldn't. And I'm just fishing this, this would be my normal spinning combo that I would use for my swim bait setup. That's what this is. But today I'm fishing it a little bit differently. I've got 10-pound braid on here to an 8-pound coal poly leader, 7-foot medium heavy rod. Normally I would have like 6 to 8 pound to even 10-pound test fluorocarbon or coal poly for fishing a swim bait head. But because I was fishing with this in a little bit, gunkier water, a little bit more slop, a little bit more cheese, I used this particular setup and it worked great. I was able to get some really nice fish out of that slop working with this, because again, just because there's a lot of vegetation doesn't mean those bass are going to stop chasing those bait balls. It just means you have to target them just a little bit differently. So you make those changes and you can really start catching some nice fish. Now, another presentation that's been working really well for me, obviously this year, is the good old spinnerbait. This is the old painted blade. This is a Strike King, and I've just got just a regular Rage Tail swimmer on the back of this. Again, this is something else that has been doing a lot of work for me, especially this particular spinnerbait. It's got that white color, it's got that painted blade, and this is a tandem blade. I got a small Colorado blade and a larger willow blade. And I'm just slow rolling it. I'm slow rolling it along the bank. If I've got some wind generated current, if I see that wind blowing some current along, and I've got some laydowns, I've got some flooded brush, I've got some vegetation right there near the bank, and I can see a hard edge where that vegetation kind of stops, I'm working this in that area and I'm able to generate some really good strikes. Spinnerbait has been money for me all year. I've caught so many fish on the spinnerbait this year. It really has been the year of the spinnerbait for me, more than any other year, any other time of year that I can remember. The spinnerbait has really done a lot of great work for me. And another thing you can do with a spinnerbait is pare it down. Go real tiny with it. Go with those small spinnerbaits, that just have the one blade, and they're probably like a 3/16 size or 1/8 size. The smaller ones, fish those on a spinning combo. And again, you can work those in the same way, and that will more accurately match those small bait fish that those bass are feeding on. A beetle spin is a great way to do it. A 1/4 ounce or 1/8 ounce beetle spin. I've been using those since I was a kid, and they are still exceptionally productive even today. So don't be afraid to tie one of those on. So a spinnerbait can go a long way to getting you those hard bites, especially since a lot of guys aren't throwing a spinnerbait right now. They're focused on throwing chatterbaits and crankbaits and even flukes at this point. So a spinnerbait can definitely be something different on a heavily pressured fishery because everybody else is going in a different direction. So give it a try. I'm sure, especially with those bass busting on those small bait balls, I'm sure that you can generate a lot of good strikes by using something like that. Now, lastly, we got kind of a sneaky bait that we're going to talk about. This is an old school bait, and it's a topwater bait that now we're kind of drifting back into that topwater season where those bass are more willing to hit topwater, especially since that wind-driven current might be cooling the water off just a little bit, might be putting those bass in more of an active mood. You can see those schools and you can trigger them rather than having frustration as you see those bass and not getting bites. But there's a sneaky topwater bait that's working really well for me right now, and that's the good old torpedo. The Heddon Torpedo. This is black with that bone pattern along the side. I've also used the green pattern with a red belly. That also works very well. But this right here, just a simple black Heddon Torpedo, has generated some really good strikes, especially the last time out on the water. I was having a sneaking suspicion that I could use this effectively. Again, this is going to be a bait that nobody else on your fishery is going to be using. I've not seen anybody out there throwing a torpedo. And the versatility of this bait, the way that you can work it. There are so many ways that you can work a torpedo. Now, granted, this is intended to be more of a chuck and wind style presentation where you throw it out there and you draw it back. But I can work it in so many different ways. I can almost hold it in place and give it some twitches like I would a popper and use those blades to spit. I can lift that rod tip up on a slack line and get that bait to come and make some gurgles and some bubbles like you would a prop bait, like you would a boy howdy or a devil's horse. And that gives me versatility. So I can mix all of those things up and I can slow crank it across the top. And it does that typical torpedo where it goes through the water and it makes that nice bubble trail. And I can work all three of those things together, which is how I'm getting my really good strikes. I'm able to twitch it, almost like I'm working a popper, get it to spit, and then lift that handle up just a little bit, lift that rod up just a little bit, and let those, blades go for about 6-8 inches. And then I can do a straight retrieve, mixing all of those up, and I get some really nice strikes. So we're getting back to where we're having good, consistent topwater, where we'll be able to have a frog or a spook. But right now, that little head and torpedo is an all-star. That little head and torpedo is the bait that's the star of the show right now, and will continue to be so probably until the end of September. So I always have one of those tied on. You can use it on a spinning rod, which is one thing that I like doing. You can also have it on a bait caster, If I'm having it on a bait cast, if I have it on this type of setup, I'm going to be making sure that I'm casting this with the wind at my back so I don't have to worry about backlashes, but I'm also going to get that longer cast. Because if I tighten this down, it's not going to cast very far, but I'm not going to get those backlashes. But if I loosen it up, I might be able to cast it a little bit further, but there's a greater chance that I'm going to have those backlashes. So I really want to make sure that my reels, my knobs here, and the brakes are dialed in. I've got this set pretty tight, and I'm throwing this with the wind at my back. I can still get a pretty good cast out of it of over 100 feet, which is nice for such a light bait. So bear that in mind when you're casting. And again, I'm working it along those current seams. I don't necessarily have to see busting bass. As a matter of fact, for any of this, I'm very rarely seeing busting bass. But you can bet that those bass are down there in the water, and they're just waiting for any time for the right presentation to come in front of them, and they will strike it. You will see some monster blowups, and you'll wonder, why didn't I get these before? Well, the bass are changing their moods. We're going into the fall, and those bass are ready to bite again. And you want to have the right presentations, and you want to have the right conditions. Again, I'm looking for windy conditions. I'm looking for those current seams. And it doesn't really matter if I'm seeing busting bass, because if those current seams are there, I'm telling you the bass are going to be there. So keep those presentations in mind. Swim bait, spinner bait, head and torpedo, and you are going to be set probably for the next few weeks. Variations on that, play around with it. You might find something that really sets them off. So don't be afraid to play around with different types of swim baits, different types of spinner baits, or even if you want to work instead of a torpedo, try a prop bait. That might work amazingly well on your particular fishery. Something like a jitterbug may work completely differently. It's something that nobody else is going to be throwing. So this is what's working for me. These are simple baits, simple presentations that are getting bites for me. I suggest giving them a try, play around with it. You never know what you're going to come up with. So there you have it. 3 simple baits that you can use and adjust on your fishery to generate some really big strikes. I'm sure you're going to like how it works out for you. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.